Oh, and before I proceed with image asset creation, and just make a comment about these videos. With the exception of the intro, all these videos are unscripted, and occasionally I have to stop and maybe delete a recording or go back and piece together. So you're going to see jumps. Sometimes a window will move, or sometimes you'll see a different tab open. But usually the content, the way it progresses, is the same. So just want to put that out there and apologize if it's a little disruptive. Sometimes there are just things you don't want to record. For instance, the last video I recorded, there was a crash in the engine after I created the image asset. And this is important, worth pointing out. The image asset was structured correctly. The image looked right on the OS, and there were no script errors, yet the engine was crashing. And at that point, when I know there's nothing wrong with the engine, there's nothing wrong with my asset, and the image looks fine, that's when I have to go and check out the image format. And I was actually loading the background image, background JPEG, and it actually had been corrupted by my editing tool. I was using GIMP, and for some reason it had messed up the format, and the engine couldn't handle it. As soon as I replaced it with a clean image, or something I didn't use GIMP with, it worked just fine. So I had to stop and re-record the video. So just thought I'd bring that up. Sometimes when you get a crash, you might want to post in our forums saying, here's my image asset, here's what it looks like, and I'm still getting a crash. And usually one of the first things you'll do is say there's a chance the image is corrupted. So just keep that in mind. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and create an image asset for my background. Again, using AppCode's template, I have a T2D Tamil. Now that's a little misleading. This is not a Tamil format. Again, Tamil is a persistent system, but I labeled this template with Tamil, so I remember that, okay, I'm creating an XML file that's going to be parsed by Torch2D's Tamil. Anyway, so I'm going to call this background image.asset.tamil. And at this point, it should be noted, I could call this XML if I wanted to. I would just have to go back to my module and add to the declared assets that it should be looking for in asset.xml. I'm just using Tamil to help me to make it stick out that this is an XML file going into Torch2D. That way I don't get any other XML files loading in by accident, because I like to set my program's association. Anyway, with my template I have to specify what the root element is. In this case I'm making an image asset. And for the schema location, I believe, again, this is relative to where I put the schema file. So I dumped it in the root of my directory. So I believe if I count up, it's up 1, 2, 3, 4. And the great thing about a schema is, and especially AppCode, it'll tell me if the schema is not present if I use the wrong directory. But if I just create this, immediately, it's letting me know that there are no children, but more importantly, this XSD file, my schema, is invalid. So either I went too many directories above or not enough. So let me reduce this down to 3. Nope. Alright, so it's 5 directories, and this is perfectly valid. Now with my template, it automatically drops in these 2 lines. And this is important because this tells my editor, in this case AppCode, what kind of format this is. What's the schema instance or setting, and this points to my schema location. Now I could just as easily just create this without that information, and in fact let's just start with that real quick. I'm just going to create an image asset, and because I've done this before, I have an idea, like I know what is important. I want to create a single image with no cells, but I know every asset has to have an asset name. So I'm going to call this background image. And then I'm going to also point to the image file, background.png. I actually changed that in the last recording that I was doing. And I just need to fix this so it looks like so it has a proper XML formatting. And there we go. That's the simplest way to create an image asset. I just put the image type, and then inside of it, the elements, I have an asset name, an image file, and that should be enough to get it going. But I'm actually going to back out or undo my changes so that I can get my schema information. Now this is, again, these are sub-elements, so in AppCode if I hit Control Space, There we go. I get all my possible properties for this. As I showed before, look at that. Asset name. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want. And then I could start typing and get information. Like if I start typing image, there we go. Right to my image file, autocomplete, thus speeding things up dramatically for me. And the white space isn't such a problem, but I like to at least make it look a little clean in case I have to hand this off to an artist. And to keep it simple, I don't need the ending tag image asset. I can just close it off right here. And this is a completely valid image asset format. And app code will look at the schema and tell me if I've messed anything up. And this is also really nice. I misspelled background, and I'm getting a little warning from here that it's not spelled correctly. There we go. And everything looks green. No errors, no warnings, no nothing at all. And with my asset created, I can jump into my script that I created, essentially a shell for my assets, not really doing anything. And I'm taking taking inspiration from the other Sandbox toys that we have, where it has a create, destroy, reset setup, and then a lot of the same code can be duplicated. For example, one of the things that I know I usually have to do is in the reset, I almost always want to clear the current sandbox scene, and this takes any past sprites or animations or anything else you need to get rid of, especially switching between toys. Okay, and of course, since I just filled that out, when my create function goes through, I'm just going to go ahead and call the reset. That way I don't have to keep rewriting the create function and reset. I'll just use my reset to do everything. And now I need to create a sprite to show off that background I just created. And there are other tutorials that show all the details of creating a sprite. And I'm going to label this to make it a little more, make it easier to track what's going on. So the background, I'm going to say it's going to be right in the middle of the screen. And I already know, after creating several background sprites with a general camera size, it's 175 usually for a 1024 by 768 image. And of course I want to add that. Let me move this up a little bit so we get the full view. And of course, whenever I create a sprite, I do need to add it to a scene. Now if I take a minute to load this, the asset should get loaded unless I start getting a crash like I did before. And if I go to my assets, and nothing is showing up, so as usual, check the console log. Unknown command reset. So yeah, that was a simple mistake. Call my assets. Now you might have noticed a lot of console spam, and the reason for that is whenever I'm creating a lot of assets, I go to the main.cs in the root and I find asset database.echo info, and that's normally set to false. Out of the box when you clone TorchED, that's false. But I like to set it to true. Now this will dramatically increase the output that goes to the console, but it makes it very easy for you to track down every minute detail of what asset has been declared, scanned, is being acquired. It'll show all kinds of errors. It's just very handy to have. Alright, so again, now that I'm resetting my assets instead of the sandbox scene, let me try running that again. Beautiful. This is very good. Obviously this is not the image I'm looking for, but this means my sprite has been created, but it does not have a valid asset. It can render, but it's not rendering what we want. So we get this little placeholder image, and this is a great thing to look for. If you're making complex scenes and you start seeing this specific orange in text, that means there's something wrong with one of your assets. Whether your script is pointing to the wrong ID or your asset isn't formed correctly. Let me just back out of this real quick. Let's talk about the image. This is the variable I want to set. This is the property on my sprite I want to set. And I can't just go, you know, if I go back to my module, I see that it's, or not my module, my background image. Its name is background image. And that's not enough though. When I actually go to add this, the background image is the name, but the asset ID is actually the owning module, which is my assets, colon, background image. This is the full asset ID, and this is what you assign to an asset field for Sprite. In this case, this is an image. If I want to show an animation, it would still be, you know, dot animation, my assets, colon, background image. And this sets it up nicely where I could have a background.png inside of my assets, and I could have a background.png inside of toy assets, and they won't conflict with each other because they could even have the same name background image, but it gets scoped with my assets. Now there are some restrictions, but we don't have to get in them completely. So now that I've assigned this image, if I run Tort 2D and all is well, there's my background. You know, it fits really nicely as I run Tort 2D. I get full screen view, which is good. And if I jump down here, this is really nice too. If you can see this, loading asset into memory. This is happening on my assets background image. The asset manager is acquiring it, and it's getting the ID from file. And then it finished acquiring, and there's a reference count of 1. What that means is I have one object using the background image asset. And this is a great way for you to track the memory and track what your assets are doing, and it's intelligent too. So if I were to switch toys, this asset would be unacquired if it's not being used anywhere else. So this is one of the great things about having the asset echo, or the asset manager echo info spitting out. So that's excellent. That's the first step. I created an image asset, I created a sprite, I assigned the asset ID to my sprite's image, and I had it rendering. And that's excellent. That's the first part. So from here I'm going to start creating more and more image assets and start putting them up on the screen.